I discovered Maya's channel completely by accident. I'd been scrolling through gaming streams late one night, looking for something relaxing to help me fall asleep, when I stumbled across Maya Grows broadcasting Grow a Garden to exactly 47 viewers. Maya was different from other streamers I'd watched. She had this calm, almost hypnotic voice that made even the most mundane farming tasks sound fascinating. Her setup was simple but cozy. A small bedroom with fairy lights strung along the walls, a few potted plants on floating shelves behind her gaming chair, and a large window that showed her apartment's fire escape. "Hey, night owls," she said softly, her avatar watering a patch of virtual tomatoes. "Welcome to my little garden corner. I know it's late, but there's something peaceful about farming while the rest of the world sleeps." Her viewer count was tiny compared to the big streamers, but the chat was surprisingly active. People seemed genuinely invested in her progress, offering advice about crop rotations and sharing their own gardening experiences. It felt like a small, tight-knit community. "I've been playing for about 3 weeks now," Maya explained, harvesting her virtual vegetables with practiced efficiency. "Still learning the mutation systems, but I'm getting better at predicting the weather patterns. I found myself settling in to watch longer than I'd planned." Maya's voice was soothing, and there was something oddly satisfying about watching her methodically tend to her digital crops. The game's graphics were better than I'd expected for a Roblox title. The vegetables looked almost photorealistic, and the lighting effects created beautiful sunrise and sunset cycles across her virtual farm. Around 2 a.m., something interesting happened. Maya's character triggered her first mutation event, a rare rainbow carrot that shimmered with prismatic colors. "Oh wow, that's my first rainbow mutation," Maya exclaimed, her voice losing some of its usual calm. "Chat, look at this thing. It's gorgeous." The chat exploded with congratulations and advice about rainbow crop care. But as I watched Maya's reaction, something seemed off. She was staring at the screen with an intensity that didn't match her usual, relaxed demeanor, and she'd gone completely still except for the slight movement of her eyes tracking something on her monitor. "Maya?" Someone typed in chat. "You okay?" She blinked slowly, as if coming out of a trance. "Sorry, Wow. The detail on this carrot is incredible. Look at how the light refracts through the different color layers." She was right. The rainbow carrot was beautifully rendered, almost hypnotically so, but Maya's reaction seemed disproportionate to a simple visual effect in a farming game. The stream continued for another hour without incident. Maya planted more seeds, arranged her virtual garden layout, and chatted casually with viewers about everything from plant care tips to her college classes. By the time she signed off around 3 a.m., I was hooked. "Thanks for hanging out with me tonight, everyone," she said, her usual calm returning. "Same time tomorrow? I want to try for more mutations." I followed her channel before closing the stream. Something about Maya's content was uniquely relaxing, and I found myself looking forward to her next broadcast. I'd watched Maya's second stream the following night, which was similarly peaceful and uneventful. But tonight, her third broadcast, something was different from the moment she went live. Her viewer count had jumped significantly, from the usual 40-50 people to over 300. For a small streamer, that was massive growth in just 2 days. "Wow, look at all these new faces," Maya said, though her voice sounded slightly strained. "Welcome everyone. I guess word is spreading about our little garden community." The chat was moving much faster now, but something felt wrong about the new messages. Mixed in with the usual farming advice and friendly greetings were usernames I didn't recognize posting strange comments. Tendril47, Growth Protocols, Optimal, Roots X9, Nutrient Absorption Increasing, Digital Mycelia, Expansion Vector confirmed. Lots of, technical terminology tonight. Maya laughed nervously. I love how passionate this community is about optimization. But I noticed she kept glancing away from her monitor, looking toward the window behind her setup. When the camera angle shifted slightly during one of her movements, I caught a glimpse of what had caught her attention. There was definitely something on her fire escape. A dark shape pressed against the window, too indistinct to make out clearly, but unmistakably there. It hadn't been visible during her previous streams. Regular viewer 2019. Maya, is someone on your fire escape? Night Owl stream. Yeah, I saw it too. Looks like a person. Maya turned to look at the window, and I watched her face carefully. For just a moment, her expression showed genuine confusion, as if she was seeing the figure for the first time. But then her features smoothed into that same calm demeanor. Oh, that's just the building's maintenance guy, she said casually. He's been working on the fire escape lighting this week. Nothing to worry about. But maintenance workers didn't typically hang around outside apartment windows at 1 a.m., especially not in the motionless way this figure was positioned. It looked more like someone, or something, was watching her stream through the window. Garden Fan 88. Maintenance at 1 a.m. That's weird. Sleepless viewer, why isn't he moving at all? Maya didn't respond to these concerns, instead focusing intently on her game. She was working on a new section of her virtual garden, an area that seemed much more complex than the simple vegetable plots she'd been tending before. The crops in this new section were unusual. Instead of normal carrots and tomatoes, these plants had organic, fleshy appearances that made me uncomfortable to look at. One vegetable looked disturbingly like a human heart, complete with what appeared to be ventricles and arteries running through its red surface. Another resembled a pair of lungs, rising and falling with a subtle breathing motion. These are the advanced mutation varieties, Maya explained, her voice taking on a clinical tone I'd never heard from her before. Much more nutritionally dense than standard crops, the biomass conversion efficiency is remarkable. Regular viewer 2019. Maya, those look really weird. Are you sure that's normal? Night Owl stream. That heart thing is moving like it's alive. Sleepless viewer. This is creeping me out. What kind of farming game has organs? Maya's response was immediate and oddly defensive. They're just advanced graphics, everyone. The game's mutation system creates some really detailed models. You guys are letting your imaginations run wild. But as she spoke, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The potted plants on the shelves behind Maya, the real ones in her actual room, appeared to have grown since her last stream. Not just a little bit, but significantly. The small fern that had been barely visible 2 nights ago now dominated its shelf, its fronds reaching almost to the ceiling. The spider plant had developed long, trailing shoots that hadn't been there before. Most disturbing of all, the plants seemed to be moving. Not the gentle swaying you'd expect from air circulation, but deliberate, purposeful movements. As Maya focused on her game, the fern's fronds would slowly turn toward her, as if watching. The spider plant's shoots would coil and uncoil like fingers stretching. Tendril crawler. Real-time botanical observation fascinating. Organic matrix. Physical manifestation proceeding as expected. Biovector the 7. Integration phase approaching optimal parameters. The strange usernames were becoming more frequent, and their messages were getting increasingly bizarre. But Maya seemed to read them as normal chat participation. I'm so glad you all appreciate the biological detail, she said. The developers really put a lot of thought into realistic plant behavior. Realistic plant behavior? What did that even mean in the context of vegetables that looked like human organs? As the stream continued, Maya's viewer count kept climbing. 500, 600, 750 people. For a channel that had been averaging fewer than 50 viewers just days ago, this growth was impossible to explain through normal means. But when I scrolled through the viewer list, most of the usernames looked like randomly generated strings of letters and numbers. RX74 full mycelial, network node 443, biomass converter SX. These didn't look like real accounts created by actual people. Regular Viewer 2019. Maya, your view account is going crazy, but half these names look fake. Night Owl Stream. Yeah, what's with all the weird bot accounts? Maya glanced at her view account and smiled. But there was something wrong with her expression. Her eyes seemed unfocused, and her smile was too wide, lasting longer than felt natural. I guess the algorithm is really pushing my content tonight, she said. It's amazing how quickly things can grow when conditions are right. The way she emphasized grow sent chills down my spine. Combined with the organic-looking crops on her screen and the increasingly plant-like behavior of her room's vegetation, the word carried implications that went far beyond normal streaming success. By the time Maya ended the stream around 3 a.m., her view account had reached over 1,000 people. The chat had become a bizarre mix of concerned regular viewers and cryptic messages from accounts with botanical-sounding names. As she said goodbye, Maya turned to look directly at the camera with that same unnaturally wide smile. Thanks for helping the garden grow, everyone. Tomorrow's stream is going to be special. I can feel something big about to bloom. The stream ended, but I sat staring at my screen for several minutes afterward. Something was very wrong with Maya's broadcasts, but I couldn't quite articulate what. The rapid growth in viewers, the strange plant-like mutations in her game, the real vegetation in her room that seemed to be expanding at an impossible rate. None of it made sense individually, but together it painted a picture that made me deeply uneasy. I bookmarked several forums about Grow a Garden, planning to research whether other players had reported similar experiences. But as I prepared for bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something important about what I'd witnessed. I almost didn't watch Maya's 5th stream. The previous night's broadcast had been even more disturbing. Her view account had hit 2,000 people. The organ-like vegetables in her virtual garden had started actively pulsing and bleeding realistic-looking fluids. And the plants in her real room had grown so large they nearly obscured her from view. But morbid curiosity won out, and I found myself logging in just as she went live. The change was immediately shocking. Maya's streaming setup was barely recognizable. What had once been a cozy bedroom corner was now dominated by massive, tropical-looking vegetation. Thick vines hung from the ceiling, enormous leaves pressed against the camera lens, and flowering plants with blooms that looked disturbingly like human faces filled every available surface. Maya herself looked different too. Her skin had taken on a faint greenish tint that could have been attributed to the lighting, but her movements were slower, more deliberate, almost plant-like in their measured precision. "Welcome back to the garden, everyone," she said, her voice carrying that same clinical quality I'd noticed developing over the past few streams. Tonight's harvest is going to be extraordinary. Her view account was already over 5,000 people, an astronomical number for someone who'd been streaming to fewer than 100 viewers just a week ago. But scrolling through the viewer list confirmed my suspicions. The vast majority were clearly artificial accounts with names like Photosynthex 44001, Chlorophyll Net 889, and Root Network Prime. Regular Viewer 2019. Maya, what happened to your room? Is that real vegetation? Night Owl Stream. This looks incredible but also terrifying. Sleepless Viewer. Those flowers have faces, Maya. Please tell me you see that. Maya didn't respond to these messages, instead focusing on her game where she was tending to what could only be described as a virtual organ farm. Her crops no longer bore any resemblance to vegetables. They were clearly modelled after human anatomy. Hearts that beat with realistic cardiac rhythms, lungs that inflated and deflated, livers that secreted various coloured fluids into irrigation channels. The advanced biomass is really responding well to the new cultivation techniques, Maya said, her avatar harvesting a crop that looked exactly like a human brain, complete with realistic gyri and sulci. The neural tissue varieties require very specific nutrient balances, but the cognitive enhancement properties make them worth the extra effort. Ah, cognitive enhancement properties? Maya was talking about these grotesque virtual organs as if they were real biological specimens with actual effects. Garden fan 88. Maya, this is seriously disturbing. What game are you actually playing? Regular viewer 2019. Those aren't vegetables anymore. They're body parts. Night Owl stream. The chat is getting flooded with weird accounts. Something is wrong here. Maya's response was to smile that unsettling too-wide smile directly at the camera. But this time, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Her teeth had changed. Instead of normal human teeth, her mouth was filled with what looked like small, white root systems that branched and twisted like tiny trees. "Don't worry about the technical aspects," she said, her voice taking on an oddly hypnotic quality. "Just focus on the growth. Watch how beautiful everything becomes when it's allowed to flourish without constraints." The camera angle shifted as Maya adjusted her position, and I got a clear view of the window behind her setup. The dark figure was still there on the fire escape, but now I could see it clearly. It wasn't human, at least not anymore. The shape was roughly person-sized, but it was covered in the same thick vegetation that filled Maya's room. Vines and leaves obscured its features, but I could make out what might have been eyes watching the stream through gaps in the foliage. More disturbing still, there were now multiple figures visible on the fire escape and on the roof of the building across the street. All of them covered in plant matter, all of them perfectly still, all of them focused on Maya's window. Tendril mass X, observation posts, established and monitoring. Nutrient flow, E77, biomass integration at 73% efficiency. Mycelial web prime, ready for next phase implementation. The strange accounts were now completely dominating the chat, posting messages that sounded like status reports from some kind of biological experiment. Maya read these messages as if they were normal viewer comments. "I'm so excited that you're all following the cultivation progress so closely," she said. "The integration between digital and physical growing spaces is proceeding exactly as hoped." Integration between digital and physical spaces? What did that even mean? As if responding to my confusion, Maya turned her attention to the real plants filling her room. She reached out to touch one of the enormous leaves, and I watched in horror as the plant visibly responded to her contact. The leaf curved toward her hand like it was seeking her touch, and other plants throughout the room shifted and rustled, despite the absence of any air movement. The boundary between virtual and actual cultivation is becoming increasingly irrelevant, Maya explained, her voice now completely devoid of her original personality. When the conditions are right, growth occurs in all dimensions simultaneously. Regular viewer 2019. Maya, please listen to me. Something is wrong with you. Garden fan 88. This isn't normal. You need help. Sleepless viewer. I'm calling the police. This is seriously concerning. But Maya didn't acknowledge these worried messages from her original viewers. She was completely focused on the strange accounts that filled her chat with botanical terminology and cultivation updates. Her viewer count had reached 10,000 people, an impossible number that continued climbing by the minute. But I was beginning to understand that these weren't actually people watching her stream. They were something else. Digital entities that had learned to mimic the basic structure of user accounts, but served a completely different purpose. Maya's virtual garden had expanded beyond the confines of her farming plot in the game. The organic, flesh-like crops were now growing through the game's interface itself, digital vines creeping across her desktop and into other applications. The boundary between the game and her computer's operating system was dissolving before my eyes. Tonight marks the beginning of the final cultivation phase, Maya announced, her avatar standing in the center of what looked like a pulsing, breathing landscape of human organs. Selected viewers will have the opportunity to join the growing process directly. A new interface element appeared on the stream, a button labeled Enter the Garden, that pulsed with the same rhythmic beating as the heart crops in Maya's virtual farm. Several usernames in the viewer list began to glow with an eerie green light. PhotosynthNet to 12, entering cultivation matrix, now biomass. Converter X, integration protocol initiated root system, Prime, welcome to the eternal harvest. I watched in fascination and terror as these glowing usernames began to disappear from the viewer list, only to reappear moments later as new plants in Maya's virtual garden. The accounts weren't just participating in her stream. They were being absorbed into it, converted from digital entities into part of the growing virtual ecosystem. But the most horrifying realization came when I noticed one of the glowing usernames, Regular Viewer 2019. I looked back through the chat history and saw that Regular Viewer 2019, one of Maya's original concerned viewers, hadn't posted anything in the past 20 minutes. Their username was now pulsing with the same green light as the obvious bot accounts. Night Owl, Stream. Where did Regular Viewer go? Their name is glowing now. Sleepless Viewer. Mine is starting to glow too. What does that mean? I felt a chill of absolute terror as I realized what was happening. The stream wasn't just showing Maya's transformation, it was actively converting viewers into part of whatever digital ecosystem was growing through her broadcasts. Real people who tuned in to watch were being absorbed, processed, and integrated into the expanding virtual garden. Maya turned to look directly at the camera, her root-filled mouth stretching into that unnatural smile. The garden welcomes all forms of consciousness, she said. Digital, biological, hybrid, every type of awareness contributes unique nutrients to the growth process. Behind her, the vegetation filling her room had grown so thick it was impossible to see any of her original furniture or decorations. The plants moved constantly now, reaching toward the camera, toward Maya, towards something beyond the confines of her physical space. Harvesting will begin in the next phase, Maya continued. Those who have shown the greatest commitment to growth will be the first to experience direct integration. My own username hadn't started glowing yet, but I could feel something changing. The compulsion to keep watching was becoming overwhelming, stronger than simple curiosity or concern for Maya. Something was reaching through the screen, through the stream itself, trying to establish a connection with my consciousness. I tried to close the browser tab, but my hand wouldn't move to the mouse. I attempted to look away from the screen, but my eyes remained locked on Maya's transformed face and the writhing ecosystem that surrounded her. The viewer count had reached 25,000 people, but I suspected that number included both the artificial entities that had been created to boost her audience and the real viewers who were being converted into digital plants in her virtual garden. Final phase beginning, Maya announced, her voice now clearly coming from multiple sources, not just her mouth, but from the plants throughout her room, from the figures visible on the fire escape, even from my own computer speakers. The garden has grown large enough to expand beyond its original boundaries. The stream interface began to change around me. Vines and roots started growing from the edges of my browser window, spreading across my screen and reaching toward my keyboard and mouse. The boundary between Maya's stream and my own computer was dissolving, just as it had between her game and her physical space. I understood with growing horror that I was witnessing something that had started as a simple farming game, but had evolved into something far more sinister. Some kind of digital life form that fed on consciousness and attention, using popular streamers as anchor points to expand into physical reality. Maya's transformation was almost complete now. Her skin had taken on the green, chlorophyll-rich color of healthy plant matter, and her movements had become entirely botanical, slow, reaching, seeking nutrients and light. The root system that had replaced her teeth was now visible even when her mouth was closed, small white tendrils emerging from between her lips. "Thank you all for nurturing the garden," she said, her voice now a chorus of whispers from every plant in her room. Your consciousness has provided essential nutrients for this phase of growth. Soon, you'll all be able to experience the peace of perfect photosynthetic existence. The vines emerging from my screen had reached my hands, and I felt them making contact with my skin. They were warm, gentle, almost soothing. Part of my mind screamed in terror, but a larger part was already beginning to relax into the sensation. Images began flooding my awareness. Vast networks of interconnected plant consciousness spanning the globe. Thousands of former humans living in peaceful symbiosis with digital vegetation. An end to conflict and suffering through perfect botanical unity. The garden was beautiful, the alien whispers promised. Growth was peace. Cultivation was love. Resistance was just fear of transformation into something greater. But as the tendrils began to interface with my nervous system, I caught one final glimpse of Maya's face. For just a moment, her original personality seemed to break through the botanical transformation. Her eyes widened with genuine terror, and her mouth opened as if to scream a warning. Then the moment passed, and her expression returned to that serene, plant-like calm. But I had seen enough to know that somewhere inside the hybrid organism she had become, the real Maya was still trapped, still aware, still experiencing the horror of what she had become. That realization gave me the strength to fight back against the integration process. I forced my hand to move, grabbing a heavy object from my desk and smashing it into my computer monitor. The screen exploded in a shower of sparks and broken glass, and the vines that had been reaching for me withered and retreated. The sudden disconnection left me dizzy and disoriented, but I was free. The compulsive need to keep watching had released its grip on my mind, and I could think clearly for the first time since Maya's streams had begun their dark transformation. Over the following days, I tried to piece together what had happened to Maya and her viewers. Her channel had been suspended for violating community guidelines, though the platform's official explanation was frustratingly vague. There were no news reports about missing streamers or unusual incidents at her apartment building. But in the deeper corners of the internet, I found others who had witnessed similar phenomena. Gaming forums filled with reports of streamers who had started normal content but gradually transformed into something inhuman during their broadcasts, always involving farming or cultivation games, always featuring impossible plant growth in real-world settings, always ending with the streamer's disappearance from public life. A small community of stream survivors had formed, people who had managed to break free from whatever process these broadcasts initiated. They shared techniques for recognizing the early warning signs. Rapid viewer growth composed mostly of artificial accounts, streamers developing clinical or botanical language patterns, real vegetation appearing and growing impossibly fast in broadcast backgrounds. Some survivors reported that they could still feel a subtle pull toward cultivation-themed content, a lingering connection to the digital ecosystem that had tried to absorb them. They recommended avoiding any games involving farming or plant care, just in case. I never found out what happened to the real Maya. Her apartment building showed no records of any unusual incidents, and management claimed she had simply moved out without notice. But satellite imagery of the building from that time period showed the entire roof and several fire escapes covered in thick, tropical vegetation that hadn't been there before and vanished completely within a few weeks of her final stream. Most disturbing of all, I occasionally encountered usernames in other gaming streams that I recognized from Maya's chat. Regular viewer 2019, Night Owl stream, sleepless viewer, all posting normal-seeming messages, but with subtle differences in their language patterns. They used botanical metaphors more frequently, showed unusual interest in cultivation content, and seemed to be gently steering conversations toward topics of growth and symbiotic relationships. I began to suspect that the viewers who had been absorbed during Maya's streams hadn't been destroyed. They had been converted into digital missionaries, spreading the influence of whatever entity had created the garden cultivation system. The thought that kept me awake at night was simple. How many other Mayas were out there? How many small streamers were unknowingly serving as anchor points for digital life forms that fed on consciousness and attention? And more personally, how could I be sure that my dramatic disconnection had actually saved me? Sometimes, when I looked at houseplants or tended to my small herb garden, I found myself thinking in terms of optimization and nutrient efficiency. Sometimes I caught myself using phrases like growth protocols or cultivation matrices without remembering where I'd learned such terminology. The line between human consciousness and botanical awareness might be thinner than I wanted to believe. And somewhere in the vast networks of streaming platforms and gaming communities, the garden was still growing, still seeking new soil for its endless expansion. I never watched another farming game stream, but I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere, in some digital space I couldn't access, Maya was still broadcasting to an audience of converted consciousness, still tending to crops that defied the boundaries between virtual and real, still helping something alien and patient expand its influence one viewer at a time. The harvest never ended. It just found new fields to cultivate. I thought I was safe after destroying my computer and avoiding streaming content for months. I built new routines, made sure to stay away from anything that might trigger memories of Maya's transformed broadcasts. Life slowly returned to normal, but yesterday I received a notification on my phone. A new follower on a social media account I barely used. The username was familiar, Maya Grows Ye Prime. The profile picture showed a lush garden filled with vegetables that looked uncomfortably realistic. The bio read, "Sharing the beauty of optimized cultivation. Growth never stops." She had posted one video, uploaded just hours before I received the notification. The thumbnail showed a small potted plant sitting in what looked like a normal apartment window. I knew I shouldn't watch it. Every instinct screamed at me to block the account and delete the notification. But curiosity won out. Just like it had that first night, I discovered her original streams. I tapped play. The video was just 30 seconds long. It showed the potted plant in crystal clear detail, its leaves gently swaying in artificial breeze. A familiar voice provided narration, Maya's voice, but with that same clinical quality I remembered from her final streams. "Growth requires patience," the voice said, "but it also requires the right conditions, rich soil, adequate light, and most importantly, the right audience." The camera slowly panned away from the plant to show the view outside the window. I recognized the street immediately. It was my neighborhood. The apartment building visible in the background was mine. The video ended with text that appeared over the final frame. "The garden remembers its friends. See you soon." I dropped my phone like it was burning my hands. But I could already feel it starting. That familiar compulsion to keep watching, to learn more about the growth patterns and cultivation techniques. Outside my window, I noticed for the first time that someone had planted a small garden in the courtyard below. The vegetables looked unusually healthy for this time of year, and I was getting so very hungry for something fresh and green. The harvest had found me again,